All right.
And we're live and rolling.
Oh, there is a little bit of a delay, which we will now hear and everyone else will hear in a little bit.
Oh, okay. I see. Oh, that's fun. Do two screens, one screen with us and then another one with a delayed us.
Exactly. So for everyone joining here, we are here. We're going to wait a few minutes while everyone else filters in, and then we're going to get going. If you have any questions, please put it in the comments. We'll also be answering people's questions as we go along in real time. So we'll try to be watching it as much as possible, but it's a little bit hectic when you're watching the event on your screen to the right and having to host it in one screen. So that's how that looks. So Russell, you were talking about your wine glass collection earlier.
I was, yeah. This does make me look a little bit. I by this image alone, I think I go more towards champagne in particular, but they're very nice. They're like a little bit rainbow colored, which is a lot of fun. And then I've got the wine below, so it's not just the glasses. Don't be afraid.
I love it. And so you are right now. You're in Vegas, and you kind of make your way between Vegas and Chicago. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, I am one of the few people that truly lives in Las Vegas. And I spend probably initially when I started this, I tried to spend a whole week in Chicago and then most of my time in Vegas. And now it's turned into like 2 days in Chicago every month and the rest of my time in Vegas. So I'm pretty much a Vegas resident by this point.
And are you United 1K? What's your...
Unfortunately, because of COVID, who knows what's happening to statuses? I've given it all up over time. So I think I might get there this year.
That's always, for me, it's always like a happy and sad thing. It's like, yay, I achieved frequent flyer status, and then boo, what is my life?
This is what my life has led me to. I will say that now that we've entered back into traveling a little bit more frequently, either for work or for fun, I've rediscovered my love of just physically being on a plane and unreachable. And I know that there's Wi-Fi and everything, but I do not engage with any of those things. And I'm just truly like my authentic self when I'm on the plane. And it is so relaxing. Mask and all, I'll take it.
I will say that I spent on my sabbatical, I took my mom and her best friend from high school on a train trip across Canada. And that was super nice. It's like the equivalent of being in a plane, but for 4 days, but being able to get outside and stretch and have all your meals fed to you. So if that's like a place where you feel like your authentic self, you might want to consider some long distance train travel.
I love that idea. That sounds like a lot of fun. A good Trans-Siberian or something like that.
Yeah, I can't speak for the service on the Trans-Siberian, but
it's true. I guess if you want the service, you do need to pick your route accordingly.
Cool. Okay, so we've waited about 4 or 5 minutes, and I think what we should do is go ahead and start. I know folks are going to trickle in, and at the end of the day, we'll republish this on YouTube, and it will live in the internet in infamy. So
forever.
So Russell, why don't you tell us a little bit about kind of how we got connected? So you're one of the original Sabbatical Project research interviewees.
Yeah, I think I'm single digit interview number, so I think I was one of the OG 10. At least let's pretend that that's true. So we got connected, I believe, through my friend Tracy, and you were close friends with both Tracy and her husband. Is that right?
Right.
Yeah, and Tracy and I had connected for a few years running at one of our corporate events that was completely unrelated to corporate world, which is I work for McKinsey, and it was through the McKinsey Music Festival. And with that music festival, it's a great chance. It's a full week where we all go to a different country and completely disconnect and play music together. And it was during that festival that I had the chance to just explain that I had this kind of crazy different trajectory through McKinsey, and the way that I was approaching corporate work was a little bit different, and I was taking a lot of time off. And so she had put us in touch to have that initial interview, and the rest is history.
Yeah, so I think the beginning of the story is kind of interesting. So my understanding is that McKinsey and a lot of consulting firms you have this track, and part of the track is, okay, after you've been here a few years, like they nudge you towards grad school. And I think the super majority of folks take that opportunity to do their MBA. And then I think you took a pretty different path than most people.
Yeah. So with the origins, I knew that I didn't necessarily want to get my MBA. I was interested in it, but I also felt like I was learning a lot of on-the-job skills. And when I went to undergrad, I actually went to undergrad for a business degree. And so I said, okay, if I've already done this before, feel like I've done elements of it, even though the experience won't be exactly the same, is there a chance to actually go and do something completely different? And so I found in my last year at McKinsey as an analyst, so this is a couple years after undergrad, I found a professor up at Northwestern and got him to coach me as a pianist. And I'd always played piano before. I didn't just pick it up in my analyst years, but I had always played piano. I was relatively competitive when I was younger. It was a pretty core part of my identity until I went to college. And I kind of just rediscovered and rekindled my love for music in that kind of last year, 2 years as an analyst. And so I said, hey, what if I actually audition and apply for conservatory? So rather than going to grad school for an MBA, I went to music school and actually was a performer for about 2 years.
And so when you came back, I'm not sure if we want to get into this, but, sometimes McKinsey will pay for people's grad school, and then there's like a hook at the end. So we'll pay, but you have to stay, X years to pay that off. Like, when you went off to the conservatory, did you know that you were going to come back for sure? And then when did you hatch this idea, spoiler alert, of taking a few months off each year and kind of incorporating that into your life in McKinsey?
Yeah, I would love to say that it was all like very pre-planned and fit very nicely into my little bento box that is my life, but it really wasn't. When I started school, I had full intention to be a pianist professionally. I thought that was going to be what I wanted to do. I had taken a little bit of time off work and kind of done a full like fasting meditation and really felt that's where I wanted to go. Very quickly into school, I'd say probably in the first like 3 or 4 months, it was very difficult. It was kind of emotionally, I was a wreck. I was almost like falling into depression. It was just very difficult for me to live in a different country. And so I wasn't really sure what I was going to do after I graduated from conservatory. It was a 2-year program. I knew I wanted to finish it. I knew I wanted the training and wanted to work with the people, but I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And the money was dwindling, right? So I probably made the decision about 8 months after I graduated to return to McKinsey. And I made that decision. I remember it being in Brazil on a tour, performing Brazilian music. And I was so excited and so happy that it was well received, because there's always this little fear of like, I'm not Brazilian. What am I doing here playing this music? And I remember looking at my bank account and saying, oh, I actually have like $0. Like I do not have any and I probably need to go back to work. And at the beginning, McKinsey actually was just the easy answer. It was the fastest way to get a job without interviewing, without having to get a resume together, without having to justify going to music school for 3 years and talking to other employers about what to do. And so initially I just went back to McKinsey because it was financially stable. Within 6 months, talking to people and realizing that, hey, I don't know if I necessarily want to do this the full year and that this is sustainable for me. And B, that I had booked a couple of gigs in the following year for the summer at a number of music festivals. I started to ask the question and just kind of tease with a few folks, like, is this possible? Is there a way that I can take the summer off, finish whatever project that I'm on at that time, plan around it way in advance, and still get the chance to go and perform for a couple of months every year? And so that's what I did. And I did that for about 3 or 4 years running, where I would work for 9 months of the year and I would take 3 months off to perform and train as a pianist. I'm also a movement artist. I do a lot of like dance and circus work as well. And that worked really well for about 4 years.
That's awesome. And then, because I have the privilege of working with you on the side on the cohort class we're hosting, and then also a couple other projects, you really kind of lit a fire under me to get the website up and the stories section. I know kind of how like organized you are and how you like to have, like structure and something official. Kind of curious about like compare those, I guess someone will call it like life design or like work-life balance segments compared to like the big time off that you took after that.
Yeah.
What did you learn? How are they different?
Yeah, I think, well, the biggest difference was the overarching structure. So I'm fortunate enough with McKinsey and with consulting that there was an established policy to say, oh, if someone wants to take anywhere from 10 to 20% of their time off, they're able to do so. And there's a program to do that. There's a way that they smooth out your income over the year, so you're not just left, completely without any money for the time that you take off, et cetera. And so structurally that was there already. And it was a program and a process that was already pre-established. The longer chunk of time that I took off was about 7 to 8 months. And it was actually, I was leaving McKinsey and I was kind of searching for what I wanted to do next. I wanted to see the world. There were a couple of things I wanted to accomplish still because I am very structured and I still wanted to achieve things. I had to run the marathon. It was very important to me. And for that wasn't structured. I didn't know, I hadn't signed up to come back. I, in fact, had fully left McKinsey. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't have a next job. And so there was actually a lack of structure in the, like, what happens after. Whereas I think that there is when you're taking time off and you're saying, hey, I'm going to leave and I'm going to come back to the same job or very close to same job. Mentally, you're just in a completely different mind space where the disconnection is disconnecting into or from a process that you're going to reconnect to. And I think that feeling, that vibe is actually really, it feels really different in the moment.
Yeah. Tell us about what you did during that time, how you planned it, how it felt.
The longer time. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it started with a friend's wedding. One of my best friends got married, and that kind of started the broader journey and the travels. I ended up going around. I started in Japan, which I know that you've traveled extensively in Japan as well. Ended up going around Southeast Asia to Europe and then back out to Asia and then back to the States. So it's kind of this strange go west, but all the way to Asia first and then to Europe and then come back east. During that time, my schedule was planned around these big events, and I'd say I'd have probably one a month or so, which was either a big, like, meet with someone, go to a wedding, be there as, one of my friends' children was being born in Bangkok. And so I was able to kind of, have these little markers along the way of, okay, I need to be here at the specific point, but everywhere in between those points can kind of be free. And that actually was, strangely enough structure for me to say, okay, this feels good. I'm going to do this. I need to be here. I need to get moving, or actually I'm going to stay here for a little while. So enough structure and enough flexibility at the same time.
What was your time schedule? Did you say, I definitely want to take 6 months? Like, how did you think about how long you were going to take?
I actually didn't know. I was kind of leaving it up to whatever ended up happening. I had been in a case before with Brazil where I had no more money left. So eventually you're like, well, I guess I have to go back to work again. And so I was fully prepared to let that go out if I needed to. And that time frame would have been about 12 months. As you mentioned, very structured. That goes for budget planning, especially after that first time when I realized I had no money left. So I had about 12 months total runway if I was going to do no work at all. And then I started to think about, okay, well, actually, if I build in little mini layers of work, if I do work as a pianist and I teach piano, or if I even teach like SAT math prep to kids around Plano, Texas, where I'm from, what are the little things that can take that 1 year and move it on to 15 months, 18 months, etc. What ended up happening unplanned was that I had a member of my family pass away. And so I ended up going home for a good amount of time. And after we had managed that situation and kind of as a family started to move on, I actually took that as okay, now I'm ready to go and make the next step. And so that that almost felt like the natural ending to the sabbatical period of getting the chance to grieve appropriately with my family and then get back to quote unquote normal life after that. So it ended up being, about 8 months in the end.
I don't want to try to make a silver lining out of something, but I know that from our research and interviews, either a negative event like a passing in the family happened, or it happened to occur during the course of the sabbatical. Was that something like, would you have been able to kind of be there in the same way if you were at work? Like how did you experience that differently?
I mean, in short, not at all, right? I think that some of just to go into full transparency, a lot of details. The person was my father. He did pass away about 3 years ago, and he historically had been getting sick and would enter the hospital, but then he would leave really quickly and have almost a full recovery. And so there were no real signs to say like, hey, this is terminal. It's going to end this date. You need to be here at a certain date. And as a result, I can confess as a son, I was like, okay, this seems like another, like strike, and you're fine. It'll be totally fine again. And I'll see you at the next holiday or the next time the family gets together. So I actually know for a fact, because my brother and I were talking about going home and we decided not to go home pre-sabbatical period. And I don't think I would have been there at all. I don't think I would have made the time, even with the signs of him being in the hospital. It was something that our family had experienced before, and we had full confidence that he would get past it. And so I do feel really thankful, to your point on silver linings. I feel very grateful that I was able to fully be at home, and not even fully be at home, like to be fully present at home, to be around, to have the conversations, to relive memories with my mom and with my brother. I was able to completely disconnect from anything else and only spend time with family. And that brought us so much closer as a result. And it gave us the space to grieve in the right way. It was really meaningful.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. And obviously, sorry to hear about that experience you had. I know that I spent time with an ill, close family member at the beginning of my sabbatical. And even it wasn't clear that it was as urgent as it was, and so I think I had to be there to have it kind of unfold. And I know I wouldn't have been able to spend the amount of time, when you visit family, like when you're working and in routine life, I feel like you're always kind of carving it around a weekend or like working, and it never feels like you have that space you can expand into where you can just kind of be together again. So I definitely understand that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think a lot of my friends or people in my communities moved home during COVID, and they learned what it was like to just live day to day with different members of their family that they haven't done since, many of us, for myself, since college. And I feel like I got to do that with my father before he passed, and also with my mother as a kind of little family before everything went down. And it was, it was really, it renewed a lot of the kind of love that we have, a lot of the traditions that we have, and was just a perfect way to end off what was, a very, very sad situation.
Speaking of family, so like how much of the way that you work and the way you think about work comes from your upbringing? Like how was work kind of perceived in the household growing up, and how did you kind of get to become who you are with respect to work?
Yeah. Great question. I think that my family was always busy. I think being busy with some project was always really important to them. It did not have to be work, although both of my parents did work and had fairly successful careers in the corporate world. As an example, like my brother and I were just reminiscing, like my parents helped out, and I think at one point like had part ownership in like an events company. Or my mom every year, even to this day, competes in the State Fair of Texas baking competition. And by the way, succeeds, which is even more incredible because I'm like, wow, you're a career person who's working for Bank of America, and then you also are an award-winning baker in the entire state of Texas. So I think our family, the tradition was you're always doing something and moving towards a goal. And it didn't necessarily matter what that was. It didn't have to be something that made lots of money. It did not have to be something that was seen as prestigious, although those things are obviously very helpful. But I think they're like, hey, if you want to wake up and you want to go like picking for apples one day, we're going to go and we're going to drive on a Saturday morning. We're going to go pick for apples. We're going to do the thing. And that was really important to them. So I think for me, work was always this, one, stay busy. And in staying busy, be relatively efficient. And a lot of that came from my family. What's unique about my situation in particular is that I was the one of the family of even like my father, my mother, and my brother who got the very, very strong competitive streak. And that is a competitive streak in school. It is in job and career. It is in getting out of the plane as fast as possible and be the first person to the Uber line. And so I think when you have this, stay busy, do the thing, do what you're excited about, plus be really good and beat everyone else at it. That's made for this combination that is me. And I think that half of that comes from my upbringing and my parents, and the other half was just this streak that came internally for myself.
Has that changed over time? And specifically, I mean, obviously, if you're subbing out McKinsey for performing, that's both busy and competitive, maybe like self-competitive. Have you enabled any change around that, maybe from your 8-month sabbatical, or like how has that shifted over time?
I think that increasingly I've tried to shy away from being as competitive. I still always am trying to stay really busy. I value like industriousness. But I've tried to stay away from being competitive and directly comparing myself to others. And I think especially since we're all in the working world now, everyone's on kind of different chapters of their own book, and trying to realize that and really understand that. I went through a period of time where I was reading a lot of different like memoirs by other people, just to get a sense of like, people don't all go through the same path. It feels like it is because I'm at McKinsey and I'm with a class of people and everyone's in the same job and we're all getting promoted together. But in reality, that's not true everywhere. And so increasingly, I've made a lot of kind of personal efforts in work to say, hey, actually, what is important is for me to write my own story. And so take the competitiveness out of it, but keep the passion and the industriousness.
Yeah, it feels like
therapy as well.
Yeah, it feels like, I mean, the interesting thing about your kind of life crafting is that you found a way to, like, either on bigger cycles like the conservatory and taking 8 months off, or smaller cycles like these 2 or 3 month periods, or now, right? So we can go a little bit closer to where you are now, where you've like integrated these two lives together. So it feels like you're living a more kind of holistic life, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that like it's all a series of experimentation, right? So just to go through what DJ was mentioning, right now I'm in a situation where I still work for McKinsey, but I don't work on the client side. I'm at 70%. So I actually work fewer hours every day. And in exchange, I get this flexibility where every day I get to do an interview like this at 11:30 in the morning, or I get to go and train circus or practice the piano, which is one room over right now. And I, within every day, have the opportunity to both have a corporate project that I work on, an artistic project or a movement project, and then a self project that I'm working on as well. And that became really important to me. And it's something that I'm continuing to experiment with. When I was thinking about my sabbatical, it was almost like, can I find that balance over the course of like 4 years, where 3 years I really was working pretty hard and still taking breaks. But then I needed 8 months to fill all of those other things and to kind of shove it in that period. So over this period of time, I was able to step back and say, hey, I got that fulfillment that I needed from my corporate career, which is, both financial as well as challenging intellectually. But then I also I kind of had this like quota of creative energy and like personal spiritual energy that I needed to fulfill. And that's kind of why I needed to take sabbatical all the time. So all of that to say, I think that people can find different ways of making that work. Maybe it's over the course of a year, you need this much time, or over the course of 10 years, you need to take a year and a half off, which is more traditional sabbatical. For me right now, I'm really fortunate in that I have kind of every single day, I get to do little pockets of things that I love.
Yeah, I think a few of the concerns that I hear folks expressing about sabbaticals is, like, do I necessarily need to do something totally different? Like when I come back, right? Obviously companies are concerned about that, whether people will leave. And then like, once I get some sort of like renewed balance in my life, like, will I ever need to take time off or not? I think what I like about your story is that it's like, you can have like getting balance and finding that kind of harmony is like kind of a temporary thing, and it changes over time because your desires change, your abilities change. And so like, are you going to prescribe to yourself another big block of time off, or like it hasn't come up yet? Like, how do you think about the role of that in the future?
Yeah, it hasn't come up yet, but I am thinking about it constantly. And when I kind of have my like 4 scenarios of what my 5-year plan will look like, sorry, I just heard myself say that. Yes, I have 4 scenarios of a 5-year plan. When I think about those, there is in some of them that baked in, right? Is this a scenario where I do need to push really hard on X, Y, and Z projects, and then I really need to step back and take some time off to either take a break or to just explore what happens next, because I have been able to really quickly accomplish the things that I love to do. And so I do think that it is important to always consider and like know that that's an option, right? Because I think not everyone says, hey, I can take a step back. Like not everyone thinks of that as an option. And for some people, it really isn't an option. And so I do feel really fortunate that I have that as an opportunity, and it is kind of baked in. What I really struggle with, and I would love your thoughts and kind of just like problem solving it out loud right now, is how do you recognize when that situation is before you're completely burnt out, right? How do you say in 1 year, I'm going to be needing a sabbatical, so that you can start having the conversations early? And it's something that I'm interested to continue to research. And I don't know, I'd be curious to hear if you've got any thoughts there on what those really like early indicator triggers are.
Yeah. I mean, I think that if you wait until you need it, it's too late, right? You're going to have to spend more time kind of healing and disconnecting and restoring yourself at the beginning than I think you would otherwise. And then you're solving a problem versus exploring, right? I think like the concept of exploring, kind of like digging back into who you are and figuring out what you want to do, is very different than like, pulling the parachute because you've got like a major emergency or burnout or the world is on fire. And, I don't know if I have a great answer for this, but I will tell you, I was speaking to a classmate of mine who's now a lecturer at HBS, Christina Wallace. And, she's like, well, I have this portfolio career. She's writing a book about portfolio careers. And so it's like the teaching and like the consulting and the writing. And in some ways, folks that have more autonomy over their career, I think, feel more pressure to like never take off from it because they've like figured out this like juggling jigsaw thing to make it work. And in other ways, they have a ton of flexibility, but you have to give yourself the permission. So what I said to her was, what are you doing in January of 2025? And she's like, I don't know why. I'm like, okay, well, that's when your sabbatical starts, right? And like, you have 3 years to get yourself to a place where you can take 2, 3, however months off, right? So if you don't do that, and every year you're looking at the calendar being like, well, there's no way I can take 3 months off this year. It's kind of like an obvious treadmill you're going to be on, right?
Yeah.
So what I would say to you is like, looking back, how many years has it taken you in the past to get to a place where you need time off, and like, carry that forward and say like, all right, in 3 years, just January 2025, like, I'm going to take 3 months off, whether I feel like I want to and need to or not. And maybe it's just self-care exploration time. But maybe you're like, oh man, I was burning out, but like I have this light at the end of the tunnel. And so it doesn't have that same psychological effect when you are trapped and have no idea when you can get off next. Right.
Yeah, I love that. I'm really big on like having those, just a stake in the ground to act as some type of like benchmark for you. Another thing that I'll do, like as I plan vacations, is I'll just like book an Airbnb. And if I keep looking at the photos and get really excited, I'm like, hey, I probably need that vacation. And I think this is very similar, right? Where you can say, hey, if you actually like book out your calendar and say, this is when this is happening, and you continue to refer to it and you continue to tell people that you're taking time off, and you continue to dream about it, that's probably a good sign that you need that. So I love that exercise of just say like, hey, this is what I'm going to do. And this is when I'm going to do it.
Okay. So anything else on your kind of sabbaticals, your learnings, or, maybe best practices or anything you'd like to share with folks? And then I want to move to the more kind of business side and career side of sabbaticals.
Not anything immediately that comes to mind. Why don't we just jump in and let's see if things might spark over time.
Yeah. So I feel like in the cohort class, you're teaching a module kind of on this.
Yes.
Maybe you can describe it better than I can.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I was passionate about, especially in my own experience first, and then as DJ started this project, I started just interviewing other people, was how did they actually communicate with their company throughout the entire process, right? And that goes to both scenarios of if you're planning on staying and going back to your company, or if you're planning on leaving, how do you say it? What are the conversations that you have? How do you even get people excited on your behalf? Because obviously you're working in a team and they're going to be really sad to have you go. And so I just started almost investigating that particular bucket of like, what is the way that you work with your organization to seamlessly go on sabbatical, and then if you choose to seamlessly return to sabbatical. And what I've really found through this, and forgive me, DJ, if I'm like talking too much on this, but what I found and what I'm hitting on, especially in the course, is it's not just about the company. I think when I started interviewing people, everyone's like, oh, well, the first question is always, does my company have a policy? And that is definitely a really good question to ask. But I think sabbatical policies also can be, masked as an extended leave policy. And sometimes there's just no policy at all, and you have to create it because you work for a startup and you're a founder and you're creating something new. And so as a result, I think that there's a lot of creativity that comes with, having the policy and what you can do if you do not have the policy. But what I've also found is that that's really just like a third of the battle, and that a lot of people, in terms of shutting off from work and, shutting off from their kind of company, they have problems with shutting off from their team, right? So they're like, oh, well, I said I'm going to leave for a sabbatical. I'm going to leave for six weeks or 6 months or however long. And then they just like peace out. And like all of a sudden their team's like, well, you just left us with all these projects and we don't know what we're doing. And then you come back and everything's in shambles. And so I think there's a huge component that is, how do you interact with your team and prepare them best to either do your work or, hand off your work or pass on your work or whatever it might be while you're gone. There's also this last component, which actually was the most interesting for me personally, which is even if you're not at work, you still need to shut off. You need to establish your boundaries. And I think for the people, especially who say, I'm going on sabbatical and I'm going to return to this company again, some of them are still checking their emails. They're still taking meetings. They're still waking up super early because they're in Japan now or they're in Europe. And so they're waking up at like 3 a.m. in order to actually still do work. And for me, that's not a sabbatical. And so I think there is a huge component of understanding your personal traps and pitfalls of what you tend to do when you're quote unquote on vacation, and making sure that you can actually protect that time and set the right boundaries when you're on sabbatical. And that's been something that I think a lot of my friends personally have trouble with is actually, like you said, giving yourself permission to fully take the time off and then sticking to your guns and having people keep you accountable to not go on that email every single morning and respond to everything, because then you're not really on sabbatical anymore. So, I've spoken a lot. Let me just do a quick recap. I think the course, especially in this class that I'll be talking through, hits some of the conversation aspects of how do you talk to your company and how do you figure out and navigate the world of the policy. But it's also getting on the team and the self aspects, which I think are equally important.
Yeah. So in reverse chronological order, I guess the one question I have is, did you learn these behaviors based on your kind of like times off? Like, did you see that like, oh, this time I was connected and I feel like I didn't enjoy it as much, or like, how did that evolve over time?
I did. I think I learned a lot of them the hard way, which is, oh, wow, I didn't think about handing that over appropriately. And now I have to deal with the mess. Or, hey, I actually wasn't disconnected at all. And I was continuously texting with my team. It wasn't even email or phone calls. And I wasn't really able to have the brain space to feel like I was completely off or on sabbatical. So I do think that I did learn a lot of those lessons the hard way. And then in talking to other people and sharing some of my experience, other people have said, hey, yeah, I do that too, actually. I'm really bad at X, Y, and Z. Or, hey, I actually noticed that even when I'm on vacation over the winter break, if I celebrate Christmas or whatever holiday in December, I still check my email every day and I can't stop it. I like don't know how to stop it. And so talking to people in addition to having my own experience has really kind of shed light on that element in particular and the boundaries.
Did you get feedback from like colleagues or even managers about like, hey, when you're checking in, it makes it hard for me to disconnect, or like, you know, like maybe folks that you had given your tasks over where they're like, actually, I don't like, I like having you kind of weigh in is not good. Yeah.
No, actually, which is funny. I think people, and maybe it's the culture of the firm that I work in, but I think people were always very appreciative when you were joining and they were always like, hey, how's everything going? Like, tell me a little bit about, like, send some photos over. And then let's also answer these work questions. And so I think because of that, it's almost, it's work that's disguised as catching up with your team.
Yeah.
And that's equally as dangerous in my mind. And I found that it was, every time you have that conversation, it's harder for me to shut off. I think about those things when I'm in bed at night and the decisions I haven't made. And so actually for me, it was kind of contrary. I got positive feedback that I was joining. And because of that, like it's very addictive to get that positive feedback. I also think that one of the things I learned when you're on sabbatical, no one else around you is on sabbatical, right? So you're either traveling in a different place and you're just encountering other people who are on vacation, or maybe you're staying at home and you're living, you know, for a period of time. During mine, I was back home in Plano, Texas, and I was trying to meet with people in the middle of the day at 2 p.m. And I was like, oh, wait, no one has time for me because they still have jobs. They still have things to do. And so there is this like loneliness aspect of being on sabbatical sometimes. And as a result, you're like, well, what's the quickest way that I can like get positive reinforcement or connect to people? And you're like, obviously my coworkers, I'm just going to talk to my team. For me, as someone who's like unable to set boundaries with my corporate life, that was the easy answer. And so I think there is that element as well of like checking the like loneliness box and getting over that, when in reality, I think for myself, I would have been better spending time alone and really reflecting by myself.
Yeah, just quick anecdote on what you consider to be the middle of the day. You said 2 p.m. and then earlier today we were talking about scheduling a 5 p.m. call and you're like, that's the middle of the workday.
So true. Middle of my workday, at least.
So just so that we don't leave folks who actually came to get the answer of the question, how do I ask my boss, hanging? So we're 38 minutes in.
I love it.
What would you kind of suggest to folks? So there's one category of people where they know their company has a sabbatical policy, and so that's not a hard conversation. But if you're trying to get like, you know, even if there's a policy, but you're trying to use it, right? And you might think it's quite urgent, whereas like your boss might think that other things are urgent. How would you ask that? And then secondarily, if you're trying to like create one or carve one out of, you know, sick time or something like that, how would you go about phrasing it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing that I would say about having the conversation is that it's never easy. Everyone I talk to, they're just like, even if there is a policy already, it's still really hard to say that things aren't working. It almost, at least for me personally, it felt like I was failing at something. And so there is definitely a moment of vulnerability there. And a lot of it does come from giving yourself permission. But also I think it is helpful to acknowledge, like, one, this is going to be a very difficult conversation. I think the second thing that I would warn people before even having the conversation is that very rarely is it just one conversation. It is a series of conversations and a set of discussions over time. So you need to prepare yourself for a marathon and not a sprint. It's not, hey, I just need to walk in and, like, say the thing and then it's going to be done. In reality, you have to continue having this conversation over time. And then even after it is approved, or if you get the okay, you still have to keep reminding people that you're going on sabbatical. And so it really is going to be, it's a muscle that you have to build around having this series of conversations with your boss, as well as your team, or with administration, et cetera. If I think about, so that's kind of first context. If I think about how to actually have the conversation, I think the first thing that the trap that people fall into is that they don't always know what they're asking for. And it's really hard because sometimes, especially for people who are burnt out, they don't know, hey, I need 6 months. And so they're like, do I ask for 2 months, or do I ask for 3, or do I ask for 12? And so just spending a little bit of time being thoughtful around that, I think, is really helpful. I have a small anecdote from a friend who I was coaching around this, and he went in and he said, well, I went to my boss and the conversation didn't go very well because I ended up with more work and more to-dos. And I was like, oh, what happened? He said, well, I said, things aren't really working. I'm thinking about making a change. And then his boss said, well, great. Why don't you write some ideas down and come back to me in a week with some ideas about new projects that you can take on, et cetera. And he said, well, that wasn't the goal. And I said, well, you didn't ever actually say, like, I need X amount of time off. Like, you actually have to ask for that, because when you say things aren't working or I'm burnt out, people's answer is not immediately, you should go on sabbatical. It's not into the culture of any company yet, although I know we're working on doing that, DJ. And so I think that figuring out how to be explicit for exactly what you're trying to ask for, or as explicit as possible, is, I know it feels like it's a very simple answer, but it's hard to have the conversation. And so going in and saying, this is what I want, is really important. That's first. The second thing I would say is framing it in the right way is going to be based on the culture of the company that you're in. And it's different for every company. I've spoken to people who say, hey, you know what really resonates in my company is saying, I need time for my mental health. And this is something that's really important for the company. It's a big priority for them. So if you said, I need to take off a couple months for my mental health, then that's fine. Whereas I've had other people talk about their companies and they say, no, even if I had, like, a signed letter from a therapist or a psychiatrist, I still wouldn't be able to get time off. That's not going to help at all. So figuring out how to frame it based on what your company's culture is, how you talk about taking time off, what the culture of vacationing and taking, alternative work schedules, all of that kind of goes into the way that you frame things. In general, one of the things that I've learned and that I've noticed people succeed at is when you say, I need to take time to do X, to move towards X. And that X gets people really excited and gets their emotions going. And so it's not, you're burning me out, this work is horrible. It is, I'm going to take time off to take 6 weeks to go to Japan and do this hike and do some self-reflection. Or I'm going to take off 3 months because and I heard a friend say this, my daughter is graduating from college or from high school, going to college. I'm really afraid we're never going to get to spend any time together. So this summer is for us. And people really rally around those things, those points of connection, those points of helping you do what you want to do and what you're passionate about. And so I find that if there is a way, if you do know what you're going to go and do, maybe that thing is just sleep. But if you know what you're going to do or have an idea, framing it in that way gets people really rallied around your cause and what you're trying to do. And it anchors things in a positive kind of emotional connection that, oh, I'm burnt out, I feel horrible, I can't do this anymore. That argument isn't necessarily quite as strong.
Yeah, I like that, moving towards versus kind of running away from paradigm. Do you suggest that people are honest? Like, what level of honesty would you recommend people using?
It depends. There's no really good answer. And I think that some people feel very comfortable just going to their boss and lying and saying like, nope, this is it. I personally don't feel that. And I am someone who values trying to be as honest as possible. Where the honesty conversation will sometimes lead, and this is what I warn people, is sometimes they are just like, okay, well, you don't feel great. That's totally fine. Then you can leave. And acknowledging that you can leave is a possible answer is a really important one to know. Like, am I willing to leave this company? Am I willing to leave my job right now? And is that okay for me? Because that's ultimately where it could go in the end. So I do think that there's times when that conversation spirals a little bit. You're very honest. You say, this isn't working for me, blah, blah, blah. And then people say, great, I'm really sorry. Maybe this isn't a good fit. Maybe you should think about leaving the company. And you have to be willing to answer that question and say like, yes or no, am I willing to do that? I have seen people and I have talked to people who have like blatantly lied about a situation in their life, and I don't personally really support that. And so I think that where possible, I would encourage honesty just to help things like, help the world be a little bit of a better place. Where I do think that there is a gray line and a gray area is almost like leaving out lots of details. And I'm someone who personally is of the mindset of, your company needs to know that you need to take time off. Sometimes it is helpful to have the conversation of why do you need to take time off? But by no means do all of your coworkers, do your teammates, do the people who report into you, they do not need to know why. That is a purely need to know basis. So the what, I need to take X time off, is the only message that everyone needs to know, right? Everyone needs to know that you are gone from this date to this date. The why is a very need to know thing. And so for that, I actually believe, don't lie. But if you do not feel comfortable and you need to say, there's some personal things I need to take care of, getting used to saying that and saying it often and to a number of people is a good way of not having to share as much as you would like. So I don't know, does that kind of answer your question, TJ?
Yeah. Question about, so you're coming back, right? Like, assume you're coming back to the company. You either got a policy or you were planning on coming back for some period of time. Like, when would you start thinking about re-engaging? How would you do it? And then after that, I want to talk about like if you're kind of pursuing a new job.
Yeah, absolutely. So going back to the company, there's a couple of little things that I've heard about in interviewing people where they're like, hey, so my computer didn't work. And I found that out the day that I returned, or I wasn't getting paid, or my benefits actually shut off. And so those are things that it's actually, I personally, for my own like peace of mind, think it's important to like make sure that your benefits are still working if your company promised you benefits on your sabbatical. That should be throughout. That's just a life admin thing, not a work admin thing. Personally, what I have seen, and I think this kind of resonates through some of the research you've done as well, is it takes 2 weeks to really sign off and ramp off of the work into your sabbatical. Similarly, it takes 2 weeks to ramp off of your sabbatical and back into your day-to-day work. And so I actually personally recommend to folks as a default to start kind of drawing out what the calendar of that 2 weeks could look like as you're going, let's say for a half week, maybe at like an hour a day, and then ramping that up to a couple hours a day. And then you actually just dive into it on the first day that you're back. I think that that's personally really helpful. And it's a good starting point for people. If you need to make it 3 weeks, if you need to make it 1 week, that's totally fine. But a good stake in the ground is 2 weeks. As people start ramping up, there's two parts of it, right? There's one part, which is start talking to your team, like find the right people to talk to who know everything, like who are the mavens of your company that know disproportionately what projects are happening, know all the gossip in the office, all the things. You can talk to them for an hour and a half and get more than talking to like 50 people. So find those mavens. They are there, they exist. And get them on the phone earlier just to be efficient and effective with your time. And then just kind of do a little like general planning. I do some inbox cleaning, and I recommend for people to do that just to like don't respond to anything, but just slowly start to like get used to what it's like to be at work. And that goes for the kind of the big second part too, which is if you're fully on sabbatical and then all of a sudden 1 day later you are at the office for 8 hours or often longer at the beginning, it's a huge shock to your body. So practicing just like basic things like being in one place, like, okay, maybe you're just going to go like have coffee and you're just going to like sit in one place for a while, or talk to people and stay really engaged. If your sabbatical is like a silent retreat and you haven't talked to anyone for 5 weeks and all of a sudden you're jumping back into work, it's going to be really overwhelming for you and all of your senses. And so if there's a way to slowly ramp up the behaviors of work without working, I also encourage people to just think a little bit about it. It doesn't have, there's no like cut and dry, like you must sit in a desk for 8 hours the like, you know, Friday before you start work on Monday. There's no rules, right? But I just encourage people to think about it because as we all know, the first day of January when you go back to work, it's painful. And so anything to almost alleviate a little bit of that pain, if you're willing to do it, I think is helpful.
Yeah. And okay, so how about folks who, like you've set aside these boundaries to take time off, like you're going to start your job search on the other side of that boundary. Like, what should they be thinking about? How to message it? What do you call it? How do you start reaching out to folks? What are some tips around that?
Yeah, so I'll start with timeline because I actually think that that's a helpful thing to talk about because I've chatted with a few folks who leave on sabbatical and they're like, well, I'm just going to start generally applying for jobs, but I'm totally on sabbatical. And applying for jobs is a full-time job. That takes a lot of time. When you're doing it and you already have a job, you know how stressful, if any of you have done this before, we all know how stressful that can be. And so I would urge people to say my sabbatical does not include any looking for a job because I think that adds so much stress to like your life and to your world and thinking about, you know, the big decisions that come with starting a new job of where am I going to live? How do I negotiate? Like, do I have to move? What industry am I going to be in? Like, these are all very big decisions. And so I would argue that your sabbatical should not actually include that. In terms of how to actually talk to your company or to your future company about the time that you took off. So I think there's two camps of thought on this. I think one camp is just be super honest and say, I needed some time off. There were some personal things I had to deal with and just leave it at that. That's kind of an option. There's other people who find a way to, and this is kind of what I was saying before with finding that emotional connection to people by here's what I was going to. There's people who find a way to say, I actually achieved something through this. I achieved an immense sense of connection with my children because we went and looked at all the national parks. For some cases, I wrote a book or I spent some time, writing a memoir or whatever that might be. And turning that time not into a here's time off, but here is what I was doing that was really positive for me personally. And there's a couple of things that I gained out of that, even if it is going through national parks and taking care of your 4 kids in a camper van, right? I think that people have had more success and feel more authentic when they go and say, I did take time off. This is, I do not personally feel that this is missing from my resume because I think that word implies that you were lacking something. In reality, here's what I was doing with that time. And I'm really proud of what I did and what I accomplished in that period and really owning it. I have heard people had a little bit more success with that. And the last thing that I would add is if you have a company that won't hire you because you took a little bit of time off for your own mental sanity and health, I don't know if you really want to work for that company, right? Like in my mind, it's a valid question to say, like, if they're not going to value this, what is my life going to be like if I'm actually working for them, right? Like This has the potential to be really horrible. And so sometimes, very rarely, we have kind of gone down that train of thought with some of the folks that I've coached around how to have those conversations when they're interviewing. But I think most of the people I've talked to have had enormous success in being very forthright with the time they spent.
Awesome. Okay. Is there anything else that you want to talk about with respect to kind of corporate sabbaticals, messaging, leaving, going, coming?
I think the one thing that I would encourage people to do if you're thinking about it is to start putting out little feelers around other people who have taken what I would call it, sometimes in companies we'll call it just like a big vacation, like have gone on leave for longer. You can learn so much about the culture of your organization from these pockets of people who have gone on leave. And sometimes it's like people are like, oh, I think it was healthy, but I'm not sure. And you just have to go and give the person a call and actually just ask the question. Usually they're super happy and willing to talk about what the experience was, what worked, what didn't work. But every company is completely different. And so the best way of really getting the good intel is to find anyone who's taken more than their fair share of vacation days over the course of a year. And that immediately will help and open the doors to what a policy could look like, how a company handled it, how they thought about benefits, income, et cetera, all of those components that those people know. In very few cases has it never been done before, and it's for these like very small startup-y companies.
Yeah, I guess on piggybacking off of that, if you were going to design a policy from the company perspective, what would the aspects of it be?
I think it really depends on. Sorry, it's everything I say is it depends, but it does depend on the people who are there and what they're looking to get out of it. I think that there's organizations that I've seen where people are truly just completely burnt out. And so a policy would really be more of like systematizing the way that you help people and support people in their time off. I've also seen organizations that are really focused on development and helping people go and do secondments and get sent to other companies and, like really connect the dots across an industry, across different cities. Like performing arts organizations, a lot of times will do something like that, where what they're looking at is not necessarily a sabbatical policy, but it's a secondment policy. And so I think it really just depends on the needs of like the users, so to speak, or the people and the employees there. And what I would usually start with as we design it is a big, huge company survey that just says like, one, how are people feeling? What are they missing? And, what would they feel confident in, leaving, keeping, et cetera, in their job? Because I think people are not completely averse to it, but there is a lot of fear that's still there. And so sometimes what the effort is really making it, giving people options and saying, hey, like, look at this option in a survey form. Like, would you like this? Do you like this? What are the components that you like out of that? That makes it come alive a little bit more. The word sabbatical for people sometimes still scares them. So I'm kind of a big proponent in starting with companies by just talking to the people and seeing what they need.
Awesome.
Kind of a non-answer. Sorry, DJ.
No, I think that makes sense. I mean, I remember talking to the head of talent for a impact investment firm that will not go named. And they're like, yeah, we really want to, people are asking for sabbaticals, but we like don't know where to start. We don't know how to do it. Like, we don't know if we want to give that. And so I feel like if folks, that seems to be happening more and more. And if folks are already asking for it, I feel like it's a pretty good idea that they're probably going to leave if you don't, or it might be like coming up on too late. So they're kind of looking for like a bit of a pressure release valve, a light at the end of the tunnel that they can take advantage of.
Absolutely. And I think for those companies in particular, what I usually say is it doesn't hurt to just pilot something and say, hey, we're going to pilot it, making it available to everyone and just saying like, hey, obviously we can't just have everyone leave at the same time in the middle of the summer. But we want to do this in a way that's like fair and justified. Sometimes it's related to performance, et cetera. So there's a lot of different components on who gets to do it and how you do it. But oftentimes I think that companies see the most success, especially if they're afraid, with starting really small. So start with a pilot class of 5 to 7 people, and then you can scale it beyond that if it's successful.
Yeah, just a little plug for the Sabbatical project. We have academics at Zurich and in London and like all sorts of places that are ready to do experiments with companies. So randomized control trials, like tweaking the knobs on how long you give or what benefits you give, or if you give kind of coaching and non-monetary benefits on the side. So if there are folks out there that do want to run those experiments, which I would highly suggest doing, reach out to us. But in the last minute or so here, do you have any like book or podcast or anything recommendations either on like designing a sabbatical, taking one, or just something that you kind of found to be helpful during your times off?
Yeah, without a doubt, for me, it's the book The Artist Way, which is by Julia Cameron. I wouldn't even call it a book. It's more like a course in itself, and oftentimes it is helpful with this course to stay the course, so to speak. It's helpful to actually do so with a cohort of people or with a group of people. The Artist Way, broadly speaking, is based off of a 12-week course similar to like an Alcoholics Anonymous, really breaking the pathways of addiction. And the theory is that we are not permitted to be our own creative selves or our authentic selves because of a number of different traumas or, societal norms that we've adopted in our lives. And so what are the ways that you can really identify that inner child within you and understand what you really want to do, what you really want to create. And so it is a lot of work, but it's very, very worth it. It's something that I return to very, very regularly, or sometimes it's just returned to me. Like people start mentioning it randomly and they're like, what is this? And I say, okay, we probably should, the universe is telling me you probably should do another Artist Way run through of 12 weeks. But yeah, that's probably the number one book. If you do it, please reach out. And also do not forget to buy the workbook and like 6 journals, because you will just be writing nonstop. And that actually reveals a lot to yourself about what's important to you. So
that's awesome. Megan says that she read that she just right before she kicked off her sabbatical. So you've got another person that.
Perfect.
I actually, fun fact about that book. She's married to, or was married to, Martin Scorsese. So you have like this super crazy power couple.
It is insane. And what's funny is that in the book, I didn't actually know that until I think you might have mentioned to me like a couple of weeks ago. And in the book, she's like, oh yeah, my husband was like, he does some stuff in film, or like, he's active in making film, and never actually mentions anything about him or his success.
Yeah. So hello to you from Sebastian and also Sandra, which you might have seen.
Yeah. Hey, everyone.
And just last thing, speaking of the Artist's Way, I just read The Artist's Journey yesterday by Stephen Pressfield, who's the guy who wrote the War of Art. He's also the writer behind The Legend of Bagger Vance and a couple other books and movies you've probably heard of. But highly suggest that. It's like kind of the Artist's Way meets The Hero's Journey, Joseph Campbell. So
I love that.
But I think that's the end of our time here. So any parting thoughts, or otherwise I'll see you in the cohort next week.
Yeah, I think the parting thought would be there's still a little bit of stigma, I feel like, around the word sabbatical, around saying extended leave, despite COVID and the pandemic and everything, and people trying to take more time off. And I'm sure everyone's seen the articles about the Great Resignation and stuff. Just starting to talk about it, even to your closest friends, I find to be really helpful and like enlightening. And if you don't feel like you have people in your network who are supportive of that, because I think not everyone does, right? There is still a stigma around it. So I understand if you don't, but if you don't, please feel free to reach out to myself. I'm going to volunteer UDJ. We have our cohort program as well as kind of, our Facebook group, Slack, everything. But I find that even if you're just like, there's something in your mind that's like, something is exciting, there's like a seed there and I don't know how to do it, talking about it is really, really helpful. And that could be to your friends, your confidants, or kind of one of us. I'm always, always, always happy to talk about it. But that's how these things kind of bloom and come to life from what I found, and give you more confidence to actually go and take the plunge.
Awesome. Cool, Russell. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Appreciate all of your time, and good luck in the middle of those work days. However,
we're just beginning, DJ. It's 12:30. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Good to chat.
Have a good weekend. Thanks, everybody.